Library computer, data being received. Working.
Fascinating. You're in the hands of an adolescent.
Hey, welcome to my first reading report of the month of August. I'm recording this on August 4th. Probably post it today as well. And these are the things I've read since my previous reading report, and let's just dive right in. The Shadow, The Circle of Death by Maxwell Grant. Actually, Walter Gibson, writing under the house name Maxwell Grant. And this was a fun one. The titular Circle of Death can be traced around Times Square. It consists of a small army of thugs, all working innocuous-looking jobs, or doing commonplace tasks. There's a hotel doorman, a taxi driver, a soda jerk, a panhandler, and so on. When a victim is identified walking into the circle, the lights on a billboard begin to flash. Most people don't even notice this, but the thugs within the circle knows that this means it's time to go to work. They press hidden switches that signal the location of the victim, and any number of them have a method of dealing death. The victim will have a drink spiked with poison, be gassed while walking over a grill, or get stuck with a hypodermic. But whatever the exact method, he won't leave the circle of death alive. It's a really neat premise. And until the climax, there's less action in this one than in most Shadow novels. But the novel goes for suspense instead of action. Several different chapters follow a potential victim as he walks into the circle, unwittingly walking into one of a number of subtle death traps. The motive behind this is a little dull. It involves a stock swindle. But watching the Shadow gradually figure things out and then, in disguise as the next supposed victim, run the circle and turn the death traps back against the criminals, that's just a ton of fun. And when all else fails, the bad guys finally come out in the open to try and gun down the Shadow. We get a wild gun battle that is divided into two parts. First, there's a running battle through the streets of New York, then a final showdown in a penthouse with the main villain in the penthouse apartment. There's a few times when the pacing slows down a little too much, and as I said, the motive for setting up the Circle of Death was a little too prosaic. But this unusual Shadow novel is still fun and entertaining. After that, I finished The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I've been reading through the original Man from U.N.C.L.E. paperbacks in order, and I'm up to number 12. It means I'm now officially halfway through, because the electronic file I found that reproduces all of them includes the 23 that were published, and the 24th, called The Final Affair, that was written, but the line was canceled before it was published, so I'll be able to read that one as well. So, in this one, Napoleon and Ilya are sent to a small Midwest town to investigate why a scientist who once assisted them is now rabidly anti-Uncle. They discover that most of the town now inexplicably hates Uncle. Eventually, they find the answer involves drugs and subliminal conditioning. This, in turn, leads to some adventures in an old mansion filled with secret passages, and a final nighttime showdown against Prosch in a graveyard. And the book is mostly entertaining, and that climax in the graveyard is really very good. And the investigation progresses logically within the framework of the Uncle universe. And there's also several great supporting characters, including, of course, a pretty girl. But overall, the pacing of this book is a little slow. Also, both in this book and in Thomas Stratton's previous Uncle book, he chooses to include a lot of dialogue with both Uncle and Thrush agents talking about budget shortfalls and the difficulty of getting the supplies they need. It was mildly funny at first, but it quickly gets old. In the end, Stratton's novels, this one and the previous one, The Invisibility Affair, were among the weaker in the series, though the good still outweighs the bad. And this is where my 16-book challenge begins, where I am obligated to read 16 specific books in the exact order they're laid out to be read. And if you want details on this, I will link to my video about it below. But here is where that challenge begins. And the first book was The Hellbenders, number 2, Seven Devils Road by Richard Prosch. And this is a superb, action-packed Western with a plot designed to keep that action moving pretty much nonstop. Now, as is usual for a work of fiction by Richard Prosch, it's also packed with great characters. Prosch's ability to quickly and effectively introduce strong, often eccentric, and always three-dimensional characters, both good guys and bad guys, is something that continues to impress me every time I read one of his novels or short stories. This time, the Hellbenders, which is the beautiful rancher Reese Sinclair, Texas Rangers Lynn Jarrett, and escaped slave Micah LeMay, are driving their stagecoach from Missouri back to Texas. What makes this trip particularly dangerous is they're carrying stolen stock certificates. The plan is to use these to help fund a station on the Underground Railroad that helps smuggle escaped slaves into Mexico. The series does add thematic depth by including frontier-era social issues, but it does so without bogging down pacing or action. To get the certificates, they team up with a British gambler they aren't sure they can trust. At least 3 sets of villains are chasing them. The title, Seven Devils Road, is a metaphor for the 7 most dangerous men and 1 woman among those villains. Among the great characters we meet are a German fast draw artist with a wooden arm, a very large woman with the strength to strangle someone, a traveling gun salesman who develops a crush on Reese, and a trio of horse thieves with a grudge against Lynn. Violent encounters with different combinations of villains are frequent. Particularly fun is an extended can't-put-it-down action sequence that includes an attempted strangulation, a bloodthirsty mob, a dearth of ammunition when ammunition is badly needed, a few people switching sides, an attempt to stampede some pigs, and a really big explosion. That sequence is absolutely awesome. Just one more Hellbenders novel to go, which I'll read before long. I'm actually going to be a little sad when I run out of books in this wonderful series. And by the way, if you're intrigued by this series, there's 3 of them. The question is, should you read them in order? And though this book can't stand alone as an independent story, I think it would be more satisfying, and would avoid a spoiler, to read the series in order. The previous book does an excellent job of introducing the main characters and giving them purpose. Reading it first makes reading Seven Devils Road more satisfying. So, if I were to rate how important this is to read in order on a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give it an 8. Pushed the wrong button there, the screen went blank. My next book, Hawker Number 3, The Chicago Assault, by Randy Wayne White, writing under the pseudonym Carl Ramm. Now, those of you who watched my video on the 16-book challenge might now be screaming out, wait a minute, your next book was supposed to be The Not World by Thomas Burnett Swan, a fantasy novel. How come you're reading this 80s paperback vigilante adventure book? And the answer to that is I started to read Not World, and I was bored silly by it. I really was. It's got some people who give it enthusiastic reviews at places like Goodreads, and so I get that there are people that book works for, but I read about the first 25% of it, about a quarter of it, 40 pages out of the 160 I think it was, and I was just not getting into it. So I texted my wife, and I said, what are the rules for the 16-book challenge if I'm bored silly? And she said that I had the option of replacing that book with another one. And I had this one on my Kindle. I had bought it to try the series out, and I think it had been on sale for like 99 cents, so I just got this one. And, so I inserted this into the number 2 slot in the 16-book challenge. And there were a zillion men's adventure paperback series in the 70s and 80s, with many of them now available again as ebooks, as this one is. And I'm a big fan of several specific series, and I appreciate the format. These were short novels, nearly always under 200 pages, that jump feet first into the action and tell the story in a succinct and entertaining and exciting way. That's why as more of these series become available again, or I spot one in a used bookstore, I'm always willing to sample a series I haven't read before. Now, the Hawker series premiered in 1984 and ran for 11 books. It was written, as I said, by Randy Wayne Wright using the pseudonym Carl Ramm. The premise is that James Hawker, a Chicago cop and a superb warrior, gets tired of the bureaucracy that gets in the way of justice. He quits the police department, and with finances of a rich friend behind him, he goes to work as a vigilante. Chicago Assault is the third in the series, and I really think I just don't. I've had it in my Kindle a little bit while. I really think I had it because it was on sale for 99 cents one day. That's why I started with this one. It begins with Hawker back in his hometown, where he gets a message from a rich guy he knows to come see him. This, by the way, is different from the rich guy who finances him. This rich guy is murdered before he can speak with Hawker. Hawker kills the gunmen who do the murder, but they're just low-level goons. There's an organization behind the hit. Hawker investigates, and he soon learns that 3 psycho killers who have been thrown out of the IRA in Ireland because they killed indiscriminately. They've come to the States, and they've set up a protection racket. So with the help of an old friend and a beautiful IRA operative, Hawker begins to track down the bad guys. And Hawker is a strong protagonist, with a grounded and believable personality. The story moves along logically with a number of strong action scenes seeded throughout. During this time, Hawker starts to develop a thing for the IRA lady with whom he's working, having thoughts of perhaps getting married and retiring from the vigilante business. But first, they got to take care of business. Eventually, they set a trap for the villains, but things don't go as planned, and the action moves from an estate to a boat chase on the Lake Michigan. There's 1 or 2 wild plot twists to come before the book comes to an end. So this was a good book, and what looks to me like a good overall series. I would read another of these. Now, starting with number 3 in the series was not an impediment, by the way. The premise is set up quickly, and though his 2 previous adventures are mentioned in passing, they have no direct effect on the plot of this novel. I think it can be safely said that the Hawker books can be read in any order. Next, I've been reading through the 87th Precinct novels by Ed McBain. There's a really neat podcast called Hark, the 87th Precinct novels, where they were discussing each of these. They finished up a few years ago. And whenever I read one of these, I then listen to the applicable episode in the podcast. And it's been fun. And this one, He Who Hesitates, published in 1965, is an outlier in the 87th Precinct. It's told entirely from the perspective of a guy named Roger Broom, a visitor to the city who's only supposed to be there for a few days on business. But now he feels he needs to go to the police and tell them something. We gradually learn what that something is through flashbacks seeded throughout the story. It has to do with a girl Roger met the previous night. Her name was Molly, and as the backstory is gradually unfolded for us, things do not look good for Molly. Roger shies away from going to the 87th Precinct. He keeps just almost going in to tell what happened and then changing his mind, and then almost going in and changing his mind. He encounters several of the detectives during the course of the day, and it's interesting to see the people who are usually the main characters through Roger's perspective. In the meantime, as I said, he keeps facilitating between going to the cops or simply going home. In the meantime, he meets another girl and makes a date with her. That might not be a good thing. Go to the cops or go home. He doesn't decide until the last page of the book. I think this book can be seen as an homage to James M. Cain in its structure and its themes. And I don't know if that's intentional. I'm not claiming that for sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And I don't think I would recommend this one to someone new to the 87th Precinct series. And I can't call this a favorite of mine. But it is indeed interesting to see the main cast through someone else's eyes. And the will he or won't he vibe does add a real tension to the story. As does the gradual unfolding of what happened to Molly. I would call this a mid-level entry in the series. It's an experiment that I enjoyed as a one-time thing. For other fans of the series, they will either also enjoy the departure from the usual procedural formula, or they'll be annoyed by it and glad that McBain would be returning to that formula in the next book. Next, I read The Flying Eyes by J. Hunter Holly, who was actually Joan Carroll Holly. She used J. Hunter Holly as her pen name when she wrote. And a few months ago, I read a Man from U.N.C.L.E. novel written by her, and I enjoyed it enough to want to try one of her science fiction novels. This was recommended to me by someone who watches this channel. So anyway, my thanks to Burrito Boy 2751. The Flying Eyes is more fun than the barrel of, well, flying eyes. Over a small American town, a streak of light flashes by one night, followed by a loud sound from a nearby forest. The next day, a small number of huge floating eyes begin to appear over the town. Panic ensues, and the eyes turn out to be able to hypnotize large numbers of people. These victims march off like zombies and disappear into the forest. The eyes prove immune to physical damage. They heal instantly, even when blown apart by artillery. Now, there's a lab nearby that's been trying to develop artificial gravity and has its own nuclear reactor. Both of these items will eventually be important plot points. The smartest guy at the lab is Link Hostler. He's our main character, and he desperately strives to figure out what the eyes are up to and how to fight back. Along the way, there's several moments of pure horror, most notably when it's learned exactly what was happening to people who marched into the forest. One thing that impresses me about this entertaining novel is that Holly never puts her tongue into her cheek or makes the situation seem ridiculous. The premise involves flying eyeballs as a threat to humanity. It's a premise that could be seen as silly, and a lesser author might have gone for humor. But Holly takes the threat seriously, and she effectively sells it to the reader. There's no sense of campiness or absurdity here. It's just a growing sense of danger and horror. The novel thus can be interpreted through several lenses. You can see it as talking about a metaphor for Cold War paranoia, hard science problem solving, loss of autonomy, and the fragility of human perception. She also handles the characters well. Link is involved in a sort of love triangle with his best friend and a girl, but Holly uses this to show character growth rather than just treat it as an obligatory romantic subplot. Eventually, Link learns how to contact the aliens and learns about their rather horrific goal, and there seems to be no way to stop them. Humanity seems to be doomed unless Link can come up with a way to counter a threat that seems overwhelming. The Flying Eyes is a strong novel that tells a unique story. There's also a dog in it named Ichabod, who is, as all dogs are, absolutely awesome. So that's what I've read so far since my last reading report, and that puts me 4 books into my 16-book challenge. Once again, I will link to the video I made about that in the comments if you are curious to know what the heck is going on with a 16-book challenge. And so what am I reading now? Well, the next book, number 5 in the 16-book challenge, is The Green Box, another shadow novel. I put this fairly early on the list in case something happened that slowed up my reading, and I wanted to get to it before the end of the month. It's the next book to be discussed at the end of August in the Shadowed Circle Book Club, so I wanted to make sure I got it done in plenty of time. This past Saturday was a rainy, lazy day. Angela and I just stayed in and vegged, and I did a lot of reading. I finished up Hawker, read all of He Who Hesitates, and read most of The Flying Eyes, so I'm farther ahead in this list than I would be otherwise. But I have a good memory for the books I read, so I don't mind this reading, even though it's still about 3 weeks before the book club meets. I'll have a good memory of it. I am reading through 2 anthologies of short stories. The excellent War Stories by William Chamberlain and Hellbenders for Glory, and Redhead Dies Quickly, excellent hard-boiled stuff by Gil Brewer. Boy, this book is stuffed to the gills with femme fatales and unfaithful wives. But they're all great stories individually. So I am still, by the rules of the 16-book challenge, which we were very careful to lay out, my wife and I am allowed to read a short story or 2 in between books, so if I finish one of these, it doesn't count as part of the 16-book challenge, but it doesn't count as interrupting that challenge. I am still considered to be reading the novels I'm reading in the exact order laid out. Now, there was one problem after I did the 16-book challenge. I realized that in early September, the Sons of the American Revolution book club I'm a part of is going to be discussing The War That Made America by Fred Anderson, a history of the French and Indian War. and I forgot to put it on the list. And it would be against the purpose of the list is I could read 16 books in a row in a specific order without changing anything out. And so I really couldn't stick this into the list. I was allowed, when I was bored silly by a book, to replace it with something else, but I can't just say, oh, I'm not going to read book X, I'm going to read this one instead, because the whole point of the challenge is to demonstrate to my wife that I am capable of reading books one after the other in a set order without being distracted by another book. But I realized, and Angela agreed with me, that when I listen to an audiobook, it doesn't interrupt my regular prose reading, so it's a separate thing. So I did find an audiobook version of this, which I'll be listening to, and be ready to go when the book club meets, in early September. So this may show up on my finished book list, but it will not also be a part. It will not be a part of the 16-book challenge because I'm listening to it as an audiobook, and that's okay. That's within the rules of the challenge. We completely made this challenge up, so we can pretty much make whatever rules we want. And it was decided on that audiobooks are outside the boundaries of the challenge and could be their own thing. And that's it. Please remember that I have a BookTube channel where I get maybe about 30 hits per video. And several of you watching have been enjoying these and watching them regularly, and please keep doing so and hitting the like button. I love doing this. I don't care that I have a low audience. It does mean that my impeccable taste in books will not be the salvation of Western civilization, and which will then collapse soon, but that can't be helped. So just hit the like button so that I know people are listening. As long as there's a couple of people out there enjoying this, I enjoy geeking out about my books, and I'll keep doing these videos. And comment if you have anything to say about the books I've read, any recommendations for me to read in the future, although any recommendations will have to wait till after the 16-book challenge is done, and that'll probably take me about a month or so. And then just hit the like button. I appreciate it. Lets me know there's a few people out there, and it gives me an excuse to continue doing this. And that's it for now. Please remember that life is hectic, so take a break and read a book.